The small cafe sat on the corner of a quiet street, its warm lights spilling onto the pavement as evening fell. Inside, it smelled of fresh coffee, baked pastries, and the faint scent of polished wood. It was the kind of place people went to slow down, even if just for a few moments, to sit and listen to soft chatter, the occasional clatter of cups, and sometimes the distant hum of music from a radio tucked behind the counter. That night, it was busier than usual. A few students huddled over their laptops. A couple of friends laughed over steaming mugs. And a young man sat alone in the far corner, quietly sipping his drink while scrolling on his phone. The bell above the door jingled sharply, and heads turned as a man stepped inside. He was ordinary in every visible way, dressed in worn jeans, a faded jacket, and shoes that had clearly seen better days. His hair fell slightly into his eyes, and there was a tiredness about his posture that spoke of long walks and longer days. He paused for a moment, glancing around, not as if lost, but as if he were carefully taking stock of the room and its occupants. There was something quiet about him, a stillness that contrasted sharply with the low buzz of conversation around him. He approached the counter and cleared his throat softly. The barista, a young woman with a sharp smile and an easy laugh, looked up. She was busy with a line of customers, steaming milk and punching numbers into the register, but something about the man made her glance up fully. "Excuse me," he said politely, his voice soft but clear. "I was wondering, would it be possible for me to play the piano? I could, maybe play in exchange for a coffee?" The barista blinked. Her hands hovered over the register, unsure if she had heard correctly. Piano? In this small cafe? The instrument had been there for years, tucked into a corner and rarely touched. It was mostly decorative, an old upright with a few chipped keys and a thin layer of dust on top. No one had played it in months. She chuckled softly, thinking it must be a joke. "Play for a coffee?" she said, raising an eyebrow. "You mean, like a song? For free?" The man nodded. He didn't smile or make a joke. He just looked at her sincerely. "Yes, just one song, or a few if you like. Really appreciate it." A few people nearby overheard the conversation. A student with headphones pulled one ear free and whispered to his friend, "This is going to be something, I bet." The friend laughed, shaking his head. "I wonder if he even knows how to play." Others exchanged quiet, amused glances. The atmosphere shifted slightly, a mix of curiosity and subtle judgment. The barista hesitated. She wasn't sure if it was allowed, and she certainly didn't want to cause trouble with the manager. She leaned closer and whispered, "Okay, I'll let you. But just for a few minutes. Don't embarrass yourself." She motioned toward the corner where the piano sat. The man nodded again, his expression unreadable. He didn't argue, didn't protest. He simply walked toward the instrument, carrying himself with a kind of quiet purpose that was hard to ignore. The cafe chatter continued around him, but it seemed to fade slightly in his presence. As he reached the piano, he paused. His fingers hovered over the keys, and for a moment he simply looked at them as if greeting an old friend. Then, with careful hands, he wiped the dust from the surface with the sleeve of his jacket, revealing the slightly yellowed keys beneath. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes of respect for the instrument. Customers watched with mild curiosity at first. Some were rolling their eyes, expecting a half-hearted attempt or a clumsy tune. A young couple near the window whispered to each other, "This is going to be so bad. I can't wait." The man ignored them entirely. He took a deep breath, straightened his back, and settled onto the bench with a posture that seemed to belong to someone who spent hours at the piano every day, someone who knew exactly how to make music come alive. He didn't look around. He didn't seek approval. He simply placed his fingers lightly on the keys, testing their resistance. The cafe fell into a kind of quiet anticipation, though no one wanted to admit it. The soft rustle of cups and the occasional cough became background noise. Then, very softly, he pressed the first note dot. It wasn't loud, but it was clear and precise. A single note that filled the corner of the room with a tone so pure, it seemed to stop the world for a second. Customers paused mid-sentence, mid-sip, mid-typing. Even the barista, who had been polishing a cup, froze and stared. He continued, slowly at first, weaving a melody that was simple but beautiful. It had a gentle rhythm, almost like a story unfolding in sound. There was no showmanship, no dramatic flair, just the music, alive in its own right. People began to lean in slightly, unconsciously drawn to the sound. The students stopped typing, their heads turning toward the corner. The couple by the window stopped whispering. Even the young man who had been quietly judging the scene from his corner lifted his head as the melody developed. It grew richer and more complex. The soft notes became layered, weaving a tapestry of sound that was both unexpected and mesmerizing. It was clear, even to the casual listener, that this was no ordinary pianist. There was a depth, a control, a mastery in every key he pressed. A few customers whispered to each other, barely believing what they were hearing. "Is he really playing that?" one asked. "I thought this was just a joke," another replied. "No way he can do that." The barista stood frozen, the cup in her hand slowly lowering to the counter. She realized she had been ready to mock him, to brush him off as a dreamer or a fool, and now she felt a pang of guilt. There was something remarkable happening right here, right in front of her. The man didn't pause. He didn't look up. His eyes were closed now, his expression serene. Every movement of his fingers was precise but effortless, as if the piano were an extension of himself. Notes flowed in patterns that made hearts ache and spirits lift. There was emotion in every chord, joy, longing, sorrow, hope, all captured in a few minutes of quiet performance. A few people took out their phones, hesitantly at first, then more openly. Some wanted to record the moment, others simply wanted to see it for themselves again. But none dared interrupt him. It was as if the music had created a small bubble in the cafe, a space where the rest of the world had disappeared. The man played for a long time, though no one could tell exactly how long. The melody shifted, sometimes soft and introspective, sometimes bold and confident. He moved with the music, leaning slightly forward, pressing some keys harder, letting others sing softly. Every note told a story, and the listeners were caught in it without even realizing that by the time he finished. A few minutes had passed, or maybe more. No one could be sure. The last note lingered in the air, pure and resonant, before fading gently into silence. The cafe was quiet for a moment, stunned by what had just happened. Then, slowly, the sound of applause began. It started with a single clapping hand, then another, then another. Soon, almost everyone in the cafe was clapping, cheering, some even standing to show their appreciation. The barista's eyes were wide, and a smile slowly spread across her face. She stepped forward, carrying the coffee he had asked for. "Here," she said, almost breathless. "It's on the house. I didn't expect that." He nodded politely, smiling faintly. "Thank you," he said. He didn't boast, didn't seek more praise. He simply accepted the gesture and took a small sip of the warm coffee. People continued to murmur, praising him, asking questions, expressing disbelief. But he didn't answer much, only nodding occasionally, his eyes gentle and calm. He seemed almost shy about the attention, though it was clear he had done this many times before in different places, for different audiences, without ever seeking fame or recognition. By the time he stood to leave, The cafe was buzzing with excitement and admiration. The students returned to their laptops, but now with smiles and awe. The couple by the window whispered again, this time in amazement rather than judgment. Even the regulars who had been quietly drinking coffee looked around in wonder. He gathered his bag, nodded to the barista once more, and walked out into the night, leaving a trail of quiet awe behind him. The bell jingled as the door closed, and for a few moments the cafe was silent again, as if recovering from the magic that had just passed through. People lingered, talking softly about what had just happened. The barista shook her head, laughing nervously. "I can't believe I judged him," she said. He's incredible. No one knew his name, no one knew where he had come from, and no one knew where he was going. But that night, in that small cafe, a simple request for a free coffee had turned into something unforgettable, a moment that reminded everyone that appearances could be deceiving, that talent could hide in the most ordinary of places, and that sometimes all it took was a simple act of courage to share one's gift with the world. Even after he was gone, the melody lingered in people's minds. Some hummed it quietly under their breath. Some played it in their imagination as they walked home. And some, sitting in the quiet corners of the cafe, silently vowed never to underestimate someone based on a single glance again. It was only a piano after all. Only a man asking for a simple cup of coffee. Yet it had become so much more, a reminder of wonder, skill, and the magic hidden in the everyday. After the man left, the cafe felt unusually alive. The chatter returned, but it was different now, quieter, more thoughtful, as if everyone who had witnessed the performance carried a small piece of the music inside them. Even the barista, who had been busy washing cups and refilling the coffee machine, kept glancing toward the corner where the piano sat. The keys were still slightly warm from his touch, the wood faintly polished by the gentle movement of his hands. It seemed almost sacred now, not just a piece of furniture in a cafe. A few customers lingered longer than usual, unsure whether to leave or to stay and let the memory sink in. A man in a hoodie who had been scrolling on his phone moments earlier shook his head in disbelief. "I can't get over that," he muttered to no one in particular. He just walked in like it was nothing, and then bam, music that could make you feel everything at once. The barista smiled, shaking her head as she wiped the counter. She was still a little embarrassed by her earlier judgment. She remembered the amused glance she had exchanged with a coworker when he first asked if he could play for a coffee. She had laughed with them, thinking it was a joke. And now here they were, all of them caught in awe of a stranger who had stepped into their small world and changed it with sound. The cafe's manager, a tall man with a kind but no-nonsense expression, had been standing near the doorway during the performance. At first, he had thought the situation was silly. He had no idea why anyone would ask to play the piano for a free coffee, but as the music filled the room, he felt something shift inside him. He realized that this man, who appeared so ordinary and even weary, was extraordinary in ways no one could have guessed. After the applause faded, the manager had approached the barista quietly. "Who was that?" he asked, though he already had a sense he might never get a straight answer. The barista shrugged, still blinking in surprise. "I don't know. He just came in and played. It was amazing." Meanwhile, outside the cafe, the man walked down the street. The cool evening air brushed against his face, and he took a slow breath, feeling the quiet weight of the city around him. He was not in a hurry. He had done what he wanted to do, shared a small piece of himself with strangers, and now it was time to move on. Yet, as he walked, he thought about the faces in the cafe, the looks of disbelief, the hidden smiles, the momentary pause when everyone realized that the music was real and beautiful. The next morning, The cafe felt different when it opened. The barista and the manager had both told a few regulars what had happened the night before. News traveled quickly, and soon there were whispers about the man who had played the piano like he had been born to do it. Customers who had been there the previous evening came back, curious, hoping perhaps to glimpse him again. Some sat near the piano, half in hope and half in anticipation, imagining that another performance might unfold. Even for those who had not been there, the story spread. People mentioned it to friends, recounting how a simple request for a free coffee had transformed an ordinary evening into something extraordinary. The narrative was simple but powerful. A man, unknown, unassuming, and perhaps unnoticed in the crowd, had turned an everyday setting into a stage for brilliance. It was a reminder that talent often hides behind quiet appearances, and that the world can surprise you when you least expect it. Back in the cafe, the piano sat quietly in its corner. The dust had been wiped away, and the keys seemed to glimmer faintly under the warm lights. It had become more than just an instrument. It was a symbol now, a reminder of the night the ordinary became extraordinary. Some customers began imagining themselves playing, but the thought quickly faded. None of them could reach the depth or control that the stranger had achieved. It was not just about skill. It was about heart, about the connection between the player and the instrument. Something intangible and rare. Days passed, and the man did not return immediately. The cafe remained filled with quiet anticipation, and the story grew in the minds of those who had been there. The barista often glanced toward the corner, half expecting to see him enter, half afraid he might not come at all. Customers talked about it, sometimes debating whether it was possible for someone to play with such depth without years of practice, or whether he was simply born with a rare gift. Some argued he had probably played in concert halls, while others insisted he must have learned in secret, away from the eyes of the world. One afternoon, a small group of children came in with their parents. The piano caught their attention immediately, and one little boy ran to it, pressing a key here and there. It sounded clumsy and uneven, and the barista smiled gently, kneeling down to remind him to be careful. "Someone played here recently," she said softly. "A man?" He made the piano sing. The boy's eyes widened. "Really?" he asked. The barista nodded. It was like magic. That simple remark sparked something. The children crowded around the piano, imagining themselves performing in front of an audience. They tapped the keys lightly, experimenting with sounds, unaware that they were honoring the memory of someone who had touched more than just the instrument. He had touched their imagination. Meanwhile, the cafe's manager thought about the stranger in a more practical way. He realized that the cafe had unknowingly hosted something extraordinary. Perhaps he could invite the man back, offer him a regular spot to play, something that could delight customers and bring more life to the place. Yet he hesitated. He didn't want to pressure the man, didn't want to make him feel like a showpiece. He remembered the quiet dignity with which the man had accepted his coffee, and left there was no ego, no demand for recognition. The manager decided to let it be. If the man wanted to return, he would come back on his own terms. And if he didn't, the cafe would carry the memory of that night, passing it on through stories and whispers, a small legend within the walls of the corner shop. Outside the cafe, life continued as it always did. Streets bustled, cars honked, and pedestrians hurried along, oblivious to the quiet transformations that had taken place inside. But inside, the memory lingered like a soft echo of a melody that refused to fade. It inspired people in ways they could not articulate. Some wrote about it in their journals. Others told friends and family. A few even returned to the cafe simply to feel the atmosphere, hoping that the air itself carried some trace of the man's music. Then, one rainy evening, the door opened again. The bell jingled softly, and heads turned. It was him. The man from that unforgettable night walked in, his hair damp from the rain and a slight smile on his face. He carried no bag this time, only himself and the quiet confidence that came with knowing he had something special to share. The barista's eyes lit up. "You're back," she said softly, half in surprise, half in relief. She had wondered if he would return, and now here he was, standing in front of the piano once more. Customers who had heard the story gathered, curiosity and excitement evident in their expressions. He nodded politely, moving toward the instrument with the same calm determination as before. He didn't speak, didn't announce his presence. He simply sat down, adjusting the bench, his hands hovering over the keys for a moment. Then he began to play. This time the music was different. It was not a repeat of the previous performance, but something deeper, richer, and more confident. The notes danced through the air, carrying layers of emotion that seemed to wrap around every listener. There was joy, melancholy, hope, and quiet wonder, all intertwined in a melody that felt both familiar and new. Customers leaned in, captivated. Phones were raised, but no one spoke. The cafe had become a quiet sanctuary, each person lost in the sound. The barista, who had once doubted him, felt a warm pride in her chest. She realized that allowing him the piano had been one of the best decisions she had made, even if she hadn't known it at the time. The man continued to play, his eyes closed, lost in the music. Each chord seemed to tell a story of its own, and each note resonated with something unspoken within the hearts of those who listened. Time seemed to slow, and for a few precious moments, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only the music, the piano, and the quiet connection between the player and the people who had gathered to witness it. When he finished, the cafe erupted again in applause, louder this time, filled with genuine amazement and gratitude. The barista brought him a coffee, steaming and fragrant, and he accepted it with a nod and a faint smile. No words were exchanged, but the understanding between them was clear. This was not about recognition or reward. It was about sharing something beautiful, something that could not be contained, something that had the power to transform ordinary moments into unforgettable memories. That night, as the man left the cafe once more, the memory of his music lingered in the minds of everyone present. It was not just the skill, not just the talent, but the heart behind every note that stayed with them. Conversations hummed with excitement and reflection. People spoke of magic and genius, but most importantly, they spoke of the simple courage it took to ask for a cup of coffee and share a gift that was far greater than anyone could have imagined. The piano sat quietly in its corner again, a silent witness to the extraordinary events that had unfolded. Dust settled slowly back onto the keys, but the air around it felt different now, charged with the memory of the music, alive with the possible. The next few days in the cafe were unusual. The story of the man who had come in for a free coffee and turned the place into a stage for brilliance had spread quietly through the neighborhood. Regular customers who had witnessed it before returned, eager to see if the stranger would appear again. People who had only heard about it came in, curious to see the piano that had been touched by something extraordinary. The atmosphere had changed. There was a quiet anticipation in the air, a sense that the cafe might hold a small kind of magic, waiting to be awakened. For the barista, it was a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She found herself polishing the piano more often, even though she had no idea if the man would return. Sometimes she imagined him walking in quietly, nodding politely, and then sitting down to play again. She caught herself humming parts of the melody he had played in her mind, remembering the way it had filled the room, wrapping around each listener as if he could reach into their hearts. One evening, as the sky outside turned a soft gray and the first drops of rain tapped against the windows, the door jingled again. Heads turned, and there he was, the man, standing with that same quiet presence that had caught everyone off guard before. His jacket was damp from the rain, but he walked with an easy confidence, not hurried, not seeking attention. Just a man and a piano. The barista's heart leapt, and she motioned toward the corner. "You can. You can play if you like," she said softly, almost in awe. Customers whispered to each other, some standing to get a better view. Some had come especially for this moment, hoping for another glimpse of the unexpected talent that had changed a simple cafe into a concert hall. The man nodded slightly, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He approached the piano, carrying no bag, no music sheets, only himself and the quiet certainty that he had something to share. He sat down on the bench, adjusting his posture with care. His hands hovered over the keys for a moment, almost as if he were greeting old friends, and then he began. This time, the music was different from before. It was more confident, more expansive, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. The notes flowed effortlessly, blending into one another, creating a melody that was at once delicate and powerful. Customers leaned in, drawn into the sound, and for a while, no one spoke. Every word seemed unnecessary. The music communicated everything that needed to be felt. The barista watched, unable to tear her eyes away. She noticed the subtle movements of his fingers, the way he controlled the keys with precision, the way each note carried emotion without needing explanation. She remembered her initial judgment, the glance she had shared with her coworker when he first asked for a free coffee, and she felt a rush of humility. She had underestimated him completely, and now she could see that what she had witnessed was something extraordinary. A small child sitting near the window pressed a tiny hand to the glass, mesmerized. The music was so soft and yet so commanding that even the little ones seemed to understand its power. The man did not glance around or seek attention. He was entirely absorbed in the sound, his body moving gently with the rhythm, his expression serene. The melody shifted, becoming playful and light, and a few customers smiled without realizing why. It was as if the music had the power to lift the mood in the room, to take each person into a different place, even for a few minutes. Then it softened again, slow and tender, touching something deep within those who listened. Some people closed their eyes, letting the notes wash over them, feeling a connection they could not explain. The barista noticed the manager watching from the doorway. His arms crossed, but a small smile on his face. Even he seemed captivated, his usual seriousness softened by the sound. She realized that the man's gift was not just about talent, but about the ability to reach people, to make them feel something that went beyond words or explanation. Time seemed to blur. The music swelled and fell, moving from joy to melancholy, from gentle whispers to bold statements, each note carefully chosen yet effortless. It was clear that this was not improvisation in the casual sense. There was intention behind every movement, a story unfolding with each chord. Customers who had come for coffee or a quiet meeting found themselves unable to focus on anything else. The cafe had become a theater of emotion, and the piano was the center of it all. A young woman who had been sketching at a table near the back slowly set her pencil down. She had been drawing the cafe, capturing the shapes and colors, but now she found herself drawn to the music instead. She closed her eyes and let it guide her thoughts, imagining scenes and stories inspired by each note. It was as if the man was painting with sound rather than with words or visuals. The students who had been working on laptops earlier in the week returned, quietly hoping to witness him again. They whispered to each other, barely moving, afraid to break the spell that had settled over the room. One of them finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "I don't think I've ever heard anything like this in my life." The man's fingers moved faster now, dancing across the keys with incredible speed and accuracy, yet each note was perfectly clear. It was breathtaking. Some customers gasped softly, unable to hide their astonishment. Others leaned forward, wide-eyed, as if trying to absorb every detail. Every time the music changed tempo or mood, it seemed to pull the listeners in further, holding them captive in a space that existed only for the sound. The barista, watching from behind the counter, felt her chest tighten. She realized that what she was witnessing was more than skill, it was mastery. Yes, but also humanity. The music was full of empathy, full of life. It spoke to everyone present in a way that words could not. It was not just entertainment. It was connection, pure and simple. Outside, rain pattered against the windows, but inside the cafe, it felt warm, alive, and safe. The music drowned out the noise of the city, the chatter of passers-by, and the worries of the world. For a few precious moments, there was only this sound, emotion, and the quiet understanding that something remarkable was happening. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the music softened. The man leaned slightly forward, fingers grazing the keys gently, creating a series of notes that were delicate and fleeting, like a whisper carried on the wind. The entire cafe seemed to hold its breath, listening intently, as if the final notes contained some secret message meant only for them. When the last note faded into silence, it was as if the world had returned slowly, hesitantly, from a dream. Customers blinked, some with tears in their eyes, some with smiles that could not be contained. Applause erupted, louder than before, filled with genuine admiration and awe. People stood, clapping, cheering, and a few even whistled softly, overcome by the power of what they had just experienced. The barista quickly brought him a coffee, still warm and steaming. "It's on the house," she said, her voice shaking slightly with emotion. I don't know what to say." That was incredible. He smiled faintly, accepting the coffee with a nod. "Thank you," he said simply. There was no boast, no hint of pride. It was just a man sharing something he loved, and everyone around him had been lucky enough to witness it. The manager approached, clearly impressed. "If you'd like, you could come and play here more often," he said. "People would love it." "I know I would." The man shook his head gently. "I don't perform for recognition," he said quietly. "I just enjoy sharing music when the moment feels right." A hush fell over the cafe, even though they had expected him to return. The explanation made them realize that his gift was not something to be forced or scheduled. It was spontaneous, personal, and deeply human. The music was an extension of who he was, and it had touched them all in a way they would not soon forget. As the evening continued, customers slowly returned to their conversations, but the atmosphere remained different. There was a sense of shared experience, a quiet reverence for the extraordinary event they had just witnessed. People whispered to one another, recounting details, sharing moments that had struck them most, and marveling at the skill and humility of the stranger at the piano. Even after he left, the memory lingered. The piano sat in its corner, still warm from his touch, a reminder of the evening when music had transformed an ordinary cafe into a place of wonder. Conversations turned to reflections on talent, humility, and the unexpected ways people can impact one another's lives. And through it all, the barista and the manager shared quiet smiles, knowing they had been part of something truly rare and remarkable. Outside, the city continued its usual rhythm. Rain fell softly, streets glistened under the lights, and pedestrians hurried past, unaware of the magic that had unfolded just inside a small cafe. But inside, those who had listened carried a piece of the experience with them, a memory that would return again and again, whispered through stories, remembered in quiet moments, and replayed in imagination as they hummed the melody softly under their breath. For the man, it was a simple act. He had come for a coffee and shared his gift, leaving behind a ripple of emotion and inspiration that touched everyone who had been present. He walked into the night quietly, his footsteps fading on the wet pavement, leaving the cafe alive with the echo of music and the memory of something extraordinary that had changed a simple evening into a moment of wonder. Days passed, and the cafe settled into its usual rhythm, but there was an unmistakable difference in the air. The piano, once an overlooked corner decoration, had become the heart of the space. People whispered about the man who had come in, played, and vanished almost as quickly as he had appeared. His performances had created a quiet legend, his story repeated in hushed tones among customers and staff alike. Everyone who had witnessed it carried the memory of the music in a way that made the ordinary feel extraordinary. The barista found herself smiling more often. She polished the piano every day, making sure the keys were clean, the bench steady, and the instrument ready. Not that anyone knew if the man would return, but the cafe had changed because of him. Even when it was empty, there was a lingering sense of expectation, as if the room itself remembered the touch of his fingers. One chilly afternoon, the door jingled again. Heads turned automatically. The man had returned. He walked in with a quiet ease, the damp coat on his shoulders glistening from the drizzle outside. There was no fanfare, no announcement, just a man and the piano waiting in the corner. The barista felt a small flutter of excitement. She motioned toward the piano. "You're welcome to play," she said softly, her voice steady despite the nervous energy rising in the room. Customers shifted in their seats. Some had been coming regularly, hoping to see him again. Others had only heard the story and were now curious to witness the phenomenon for themselves. Phones were raised discreetly, not to interrupt, but to capture the moment in case it happened again. Everyone leaned in, feeling the tension and anticipation. He approached the piano, sitting with the same calm posture as before. His hands hovered over the keys for a moment, almost as if he were greeting old friends. Then he began. This time, the music was different. It was bolder, more adventurous, filled with unexpected shifts and intricate patterns. The melody carried an energy that pulsed through the cafe, making hearts beat a little faster. Notes rose and fell, danced and lingered, weaving a story that seemed alive in every corner of the room. People watched, entranced. A woman in her 30s put down her book, eyes wide. A young man sipping espresso straightened in his chair, unable to look away. Even the children who had come with their parents fell silent, captivated by the sound. The music spoke to everyone differently, yet everyone felt it deeply. The barista noticed the subtle way his fingers moved, not just pressing keys, but almost caressing them. There was intention behind each note, a connection between the man and the piano that made it seem like they were partners in creation rather than separate entities. The melody shifted from soft and reflective to lively and playful, carrying joy, sorrow, and everything in between. The cafe had become a theater, the customers an audience, but unlike a normal performance, this was intimate, almost private. No one clapped or cheered yet. Everyone was too absorbed in the music to even breathe fully. It was as if the room itself held its breath. Then suddenly, the music took a turn. It became urgent, intense, almost like a conversation happening only through sound. Customers leaned forward instinctively. The man's expression remained calm, yet there was a focus in his eyes that showed the depth of his concentration. Each note seemed carefully chosen to evoke a specific feeling, a specific reaction. It was mesmerizing. The manager watched from the doorway, impressed and quietly amazed. He realized that what the man was doing went beyond skill. This was storytelling without words, a way to reach into the hearts of everyone present and make them feel something profound. Some customers had tears in their eyes, others had goosebumps, and some simply stared in awe, unsure if they were witnessing reality or something magical. A couple sitting near the back whispered to each other. "I don't understand how he does it," the woman said softly. It's like he can make the piano speak." The man nodded, unable to form words. The music was too much, yet too beautiful to interrupt with anything else. The melody softened for a moment, delicate and reflective, and a hush fell over the cafe. It was the kind of silence where even breathing seemed loud. Then the music surged again, this time faster, more intricate. The man's fingers flew across the keys with astonishing speed, yet every note was clear, deliberate, perfect. It was impossible to look away. A few customers had quietly moved closer to the piano, not wanting to miss any detail. Their eyes followed every movement of his hands, their ears drinking in every chord, every transition. Even those who had been skeptical or curious before were now completely absorbed. Unable to imagine that someone so ordinary in appearance could possess such extraordinary talent, the barista felt her chest tighten as the music swelled. She had witnessed it twice now, yet each time it had a different effect, a new depth that left her speechless. She remembered her earlier judgment, the moments of amusement and doubt, and felt a deep sense of humility. This was a gift, rare and precious, shared without expectation, and it was unfolding in front of her. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the street wet and glistening under the evening lights. The world continued its rhythm, cars passing, people walking by, unaware of the small miracle happening in the cafe. But inside, time seemed to stretch, each note lingering just long enough to capture hearts. The man shifted seamlessly from one piece to another, blending styles and emotions in a way that seemed effortless. Sometimes the music was classical, precise, and deliberate. At other times, it took on the free flow of jazz, playful and improvisational. Customers felt as though they were traveling through different worlds without leaving their seats. A young boy, perhaps no older than 8, leaned on his mother's arm, eyes wide and fixed on the piano. "Mom," he whispered, "how can he play like that? I want to play like that someday." His mother smiled, squeezing his hand gently. "Some people are born with a gift," she said softly, "and some people work very hard. But what matters most is the love they put into it." The boy watched in silence, absorbing not just the music, but the connection between the man and the piano. He could feel the dedication, the patience, the countless hours that must have led to this moment, and it inspired something inside him, a quiet yearning to pursue his own passions with the same devotion. The barista noticed another subtle detail, the way the man seemed to sense the room, the audience. He was not performing for them in the traditional sense. He was aware of their presence, yes, but he did not seek their approval or admiration. His focus was entirely on the music, and yet it reached everyone present, touching their emotions in ways that words could not dot as the evening progressed. The performance built to an astonishing climax. The notes became faster, more intricate, almost impossible to follow. The cafe was filled with sound, energy, and emotion all at once. Customers held their breath, leaning forward as if closer proximity would somehow help them grasp the brilliance unfolding before them. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the music slowed. The notes softened, became gentle and sparse, echoing in the quiet space. It was a deliberate decrescendo, a conclusion that left everyone in awe. The final note lingered for a moment before fading into silence, a gentle reminder that the magic they had witnessed was real and fleeting. Yet unforgettable, the cafe remained quiet for a few seconds, stunned by what had just occurred. Then applause broke out, growing louder and more heartfelt than any before. Customers stood, clapping, cheering, some with tears in their eyes. The barista brought the man a coffee, still warm, and he accepted it with a nod and a faint smile. "Thank you," he said simply. There was no boast, no claim to fame, just quiet acknowledgement of appreciation. The manager approached cautiously. "You could play here every day if you wanted," he said quietly. "People would love it. I would love it." The man shook his head gently. "I play when I feel it," he said softly. "I don't perform for recognition. I just share what I love when the moment feels right." The barista nodded, understanding completely. It was clear now that this man's gift was not about fame or attention. It was about connection, emotion, and the quiet joy of sharing something deeply personal. The music had transformed the cafe, touched everyone present, and left an impression that would linger far longer than any performance could. Even after he left that night, the memory remained. Customers whispered about the experience, recounting the shifts in melody, the subtle changes in tempo, and the emotional power of each note. The piano sat in its corner, still and quiet, yet charged with the echoes of brilliance. Each key seemed to carry a story, a memory of what had passed through this small cafe and touched the hearts of everyone present. The barista polished the piano one last time before closing, smiling to herself. She realized that ordinary places could host extraordinary events, that ordinary people could hold unimaginable talent, and that sometimes all it took was courage to share a gift with the world. Outside, the city was calm, the streets glistening under the streetlights. But inside, the cafe had been transformed, if only for a few hours, into a place of magic and inspiration. And everyone who had been there knew that they had witnessed something rare, something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. The cafe had never felt so alive. The story of the man who could transform a simple piano into an instrument of pure magic had become part of its soul. Customers whispered about him quietly, not wanting to disturb the aura of the place, and yet they couldn't stop themselves from speaking in soft tones. Everyone who had witnessed him play felt as though they had glimpsed something rare, something that could not be described with words alone. That evening, the cafe was unusually crowded. A light drizzle tapped against the windows, and the smell of fresh coffee mingled with the soft scent of rain on the pavement. People had come early, some hoping to hear the man again, others simply curious to see if the legend was real. Even regulars who had been there before sat quietly in anticipation, whispering to themselves, replaying memories of the music that had filled the space on previous nights. The barista stood behind the counter, polishing cups and refilling the coffee machine. But her eyes kept drifting toward the corner where the piano sat. She had left it spotless, the keys glinting under the warm lights. Every day, she thought about the man and how different he made the cafe feel. It was no longer just a place to drink coffee. It had become a place where something extraordinary could happen at any moment. The door jingled softly, and all heads turned. He had returned. The man stepped inside calmly, a faint smile on his face, his coat slightly damp from the rain outside. There was no announcement, no flourish, just the quiet certainty that he had something to share. Customers instinctively leaned forward, their anticipation palpable. Phones were held up discreetly, but no one spoke. Everyone wanted to experience the moment without interruption. He approached the piano with the same gentle confidence he had shown before. Sitting on the bench, he took a deep breath and let his hands hover over the keys for a moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, he began. The first notes were soft, delicate, almost a whisper. The sound filled the room, gentle and inviting, drawing everyone in. Customers fell silent, entranced. It was as if the cafe had shifted into another world, a world where the music held all the power and every other sound faded into the background. The melody grew slowly, each note carefully chosen, each chord layered with emotion. The barista watched in awe, remembering the first time she had heard him. The feeling was the same, yet somehow deeper this time. The music seemed to reach into the hearts of everyone present, touching something they hadn't realized was there. A young boy sitting near the window leaned forward, eyes wide, unable to contain his fascination. His mother placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "It's okay," she whispered. "Just listen." The boy nodded, mesmerized, as if he had been transported into a world where the only language was the piano. The man's hands moved with astonishing precision, yet his movements were fluid, almost effortless. Each note carried weight, each chord told a story, and the transitions between melodies were seamless. Customers felt a range of emotions they could not put into words: joy, nostalgia, longing, hope. It was impossible not to be affected. The barista noticed that he seemed to sense the room in a way that went beyond awareness. He was not performing for the audience in the usual sense. He was aware of their presence, yes, but the music flowed naturally, as if it had its own mind, and he was merely the vessel through which it spoke. The effect was hypnotic. Some customers began to record videos, but they did so quietly, careful not to disturb the atmosphere. Others simply closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. It was as though the piano had become a living thing, breathing life into every person in the room. The rain outside continued to fall softly, a gentle accompaniment to the music that seemed almost cinematic in its scoped out. As the performance continued, the melodies became more intricate. The man's fingers danced across the keys with astonishing speed, yet every note was clear, every chord perfectly articulated. The cafe was filled with energy, tension, and beauty all at once. People leaned in instinctively, caught up in the spell of the music. It was impossible not to feel something profound about a woman sitting near the back whispered to her friend, her voice barely audible. "I've never heard anything like this. It's alive." The friend nodded, unable to speak. She felt the same way, her heart beating faster, emotions rising with every note. The music shifted again, becoming softer, more intimate. The man's hands moved gently across the keys, creating a sense of tenderness and reflection. Some customers closed their eyes, tears welling without warning. It was as though the music had opened something deep inside them, something they hadn't even realized was there. The barista noticed the small details, the way his fingers lingered on certain keys, the subtle changes in tempo, the way he leaned into the piano as though listening to it as much as playing it. It was not just technique. It was connection. The piano and the man were partners, telling a story together, and everyone in the cafe was invited to listen. The performance began to build again, gradually, like a tide rising. The music became more powerful, more commanding. Customers felt the energy in the room shift. Hearts pounded in rhythm with the melody. Some held their breath, caught between wonder and disbelief. It was impossible to predict what would come next, and that made every note all the more thrilling. The man's expression remained calm, serene even, but there was a focus in his eyes that showed the depth of his concentration. Each movement of his hands was deliberate yet effortless, and the complexity of the music seemed to tell a story beyond words. It was a story of life, emotion, and human experience, unfolding in real time, for anyone willing to listen. A couple near the window held hands, their eyes fixed on the piano. The young boy from earlier was now sitting completely still, completely absorbed. Even the regulars who had come for their evening coffee were silent, caught in the spell of the music. The atmosphere was electric, yet gentle, charged with the quiet intensity of shared experience. The music continued to shift, exploring new themes, surprising the listeners with each passage. Sometimes it was joyful and playful, at other times somber and reflective. The man moved seamlessly between moods, never breaking the flow, as if the piano itself guided him. The customers felt themselves carried along, swept into the ebb and flow of emotion, and sound dot at one point, the music softened, almost fragile, and the cafe felt as though it had taken a deep breath along with the man. The tension was palpable, the anticipation almost unbearable. Then, without warning, the melody surged again, faster, brighter, more intricate. The hands flew across the keys with breathtaking skill, every note perfectly timed, every chord harmonized beautifully. The customers gasped collectively. Some whispered in awe. Some were unable to contain their amazement. Even the barista, who had seen him play multiple times, felt her heart skip at the intensity and beauty of what she was witnessing. It was impossible to look away, impossible to imagine that someone so ordinary in appearance could command such extraordinary talent as the music reached its peak, filling the cafe with a wave of sound so powerful that it felt almost tangible. Every listener felt it in their chest, in their stomach, in their heart. Some closed their eyes, overwhelmed by the emotions stirring within them. Some simply stared, transfixed. It was the kind of performance that could not be captured on video, that could not be described adequately with words. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the music softened again. Notes became gentle, delicate, like raindrops falling on a quiet street. The tempo slowed, the energy dissipated, leaving the cafe bathed in the resonance of the final chords. The silence that followed was profound, almost sacred. Everyone held their breath for a moment, as if afraid to disturb the lingering magic. Slowly, the room erupted in applause. It began quietly, a few hands clapping hesitantly, then louder, louder still, until the entire cafe was standing, cheering, clapping, some even whistling softly. People were smiling, crying, laughing quietly in disbelief. The barista brought him a coffee, still warm, and he accepted it with a nod and a faint smile. "Thank you," he said simply. There was no boast, no demand for attention, only the quiet acknowledgement of appreciation. He had shared his gift once again, and the cafe had been transformed. The manager approached, all written across his face. "You could play here every night," he said quietly. "People would come from all over to hear you." The man shook his head gently. "I play when it feels right," he said softly. "I don't perform for recognition. I just share what I love when the moment calls for it." The barista nodded, understanding completely. It was not about fame or applause, or even the admiration of the crowd. It was about the music itself, the connection, and the ability to touch hearts without words. The cafe slowly returned to its quiet rhythm as the night went on. Customers lingered, talking in hushed tones, replaying moments of the performance in their minds. Some shared their thoughts with strangers, marveling at the skill, the humility, and the emotion of the man who had made the piano sing. Others simply sat quietly, savoring the memory of what they had just experienced, feeling a warmth that was hard to explain, but impossible to forget. Even after he left that night, the echo of the music remained. The piano sat quietly in its corner, keys glinting under the warm lights, charged with the memory of brilliance. And everyone who had been there felt the quiet truth. The next morning, the cafe opened under a quiet, golden sunlight. The streets outside were alive with the usual bustle of cars, bicycles, and pedestrians, but inside the small space, there was a sense of calm that carried from the night before. The piano sat in its corner, polished and waiting, silent yet somehow humming with memory. Customers trickled in, some regulars, some curious newcomers who had heard whispers about the man whose music could change the ordinary into something magical. The barista had arrived early, wiping down the counters and arranging pastries neatly in the display. She paused by the piano, fingers lightly brushing the keys. Even in silence, it seemed alive, as if it remembered the nights when it had sung under the hands of the man who had come for a coffee. She smiled softly, recalling the melodies, the intensity, the joy, and the tenderness that had filled the space. She had seen him play several times now, yet each performance was different, each one unforgettable. A few customers had already taken their seats. They whispered quietly to one another about the man, some expressing hope that he might return today. No one had seen him for a few days, and yet the memory of his music lingered in their minds like a delicate fragrance. The cafe had become a little sanctuary, a place where people could come and imagine the extraordinary even within the routines of their everyday lives. Suddenly, the door jingled. Heads turned automatically, hearts leaping. He had returned. The man stepped inside with his usual quiet confidence, a faint smile on his lips, water droplets glistening on his coat from the early morning drizzle. Customers instinctively leaned forward, their eyes wide with anticipation. Some reached for their phones, but no one spoke. The room held its breath, knowing that another experience awaited them, one that would be different, yet just as mesmerizing. He walked calmly toward the piano, sitting down with ease and adjusting the bench. For a moment, his hands hovered over the keys, a gentle pause that felt like an invitation. Then, as if the room itself had given permission, he began. The first notes were soft, almost shy, yet full of emotion. They reached the ears of everyone present, sinking into their hearts, stirring memories, hopes, and dreams that had been quietly tucked away. The barista watched in awe, noting the subtle way he connected with the piano, the almost imperceptible movement of his fingers that produced a sound both powerful and delicate. The melody flowed naturally, growing slowly in strength and complexity. Customers who had witnessed him before felt the familiar pull, yet this performance felt new, fresh, and full of surprises. Every note seemed alive, carrying with it a story that unfolded in real time, touching each listener differently. Some felt joy, others nostalgia, some a quiet yearning, all united by the beauty of the sound. A young woman at a corner table paused her writing, pencil hovering mid-air. She closed her eyes, letting the music guide her imagination. The notes painted pictures in her mind, distant mountains, flowing rivers, quiet evenings, and bustling streets. She felt connected to the man, to the piano, and to the others in the cafe in a way she couldn't explain. The barista noticed a small boy near the window, holding his mother's hand tightly. He was staring at the piano with wide, unblinking eyes, captivated by the magic that seemed to pour from the instrument. The mother whispered softly, "Just listen." And the boy did, leaning closer, as if he could catch every nuance, every whisper of the melody. The music shifted subtly, becoming faster, more lively. The man's hands moved with breathtaking speed, yet each note remained clear, each chord precise. The cafe seemed to pulse with energy, yet no one dared to speak, afraid to interrupt the fragile beauty of the moment. Customers leaned forward, some unconsciously holding their breath as the melody swirled around them, wrapping them in a cocoon of sound. The barista felt tears prick at her eyes. She had seen him perform before, had been in awe of his talent, but this time something felt different. There was an intimacy in the music, a sense of vulnerability that made it feel alive, like the piano was speaking not only to the audience, but also sharing a piece of the man's soul. It was a reminder that beauty often comes from openness, honesty, and the courage to share what we hold most dear. The music softened, tender and gentle, like a lullaby, drawing the listeners into a quiet, reflective space. A few people closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. They felt the emotions behind each note, the care, the thoughtfulness, the quiet joy and sorrow that lived within the melodies. Even those who had come for a simple cup of coffee found themselves changed, transported, and inspired. The melody began to build again, gradually, like the rising of the sun over a quiet horizon. The man's fingers moved with precision, yet with fluidity that made it seem effortless. The music told a story of hope and resilience, of beauty found in unexpected moments, of the extraordinary hiding within the ordinary. Each note carried weight, Each chord carried meaning, and the audience felt it deeply. The cafe was filled with a delicate tension, an anticipation that seemed almost tangible. The barista noticed customers exchanging glances, their faces filled with awe, admiration, and a quiet reverence. Some whispered softly, sharing what the music made them feel, while others simply listened, unable to articulate the emotions swirling within them. Then, as if the music had been holding its breath, it surged into a climax. Notes flew faster, brighter, more intricate, yet every chord remained perfectly clear. The cafe pulsed with energy, and every listener felt it in their chest. Hearts beat in rhythm with the melody, eyes widened, and some leaned forward, trying to catch every detail. It was impossible to predict where the music would go next, and that made it all the more thrilling. The man's expression remained calm, yet focused. Every movement of his hands was deliberate, precise, yet fluid. The music was alive, almost as if it had a will of its own, flowing through him, touching everyone present, connecting them in a shared, unspoken understanding. It was a performance that transcended talent, a communion of emotion, skill, and human connection. A young boy whispered to his mother, "Mom, how can someone play like that?" She smiled, squeezing his hand. "It's not just about skill," she said softly. "It's about heart, and courage, and love for what you do." The boy nodded, absorbing the lesson, feeling inspired, and perhaps understanding something about dedication and passion he had never thought about before. The music softened once more, delicate, reflective, and intimate. The cafe seemed to hold its breath again, the customers lost in the final notes, savoring the quiet beauty that lingered after the intensity of the climax. The man's hands hovered gently over the keys, almost reluctant to leave the music behind, and the audience felt the emotion in that moment as keenly as they had in every note that came before. Then, silence. The final note lingered in the air, a delicate echo that faded slowly, leaving the cafe in a quiet, almost sacred stillness. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, applause began. It was quiet at first, hesitant, then grew louder and louder, until the entire cafe was clapping, cheering, and some even whistling softly. Tears glistened on a few cheeks, and the barista felt her own eyes fill with emotion. She brought the man a coffee, still warm and fragrant. He accepted it with a nod and a faint smile, sitting quietly for a moment as he sipped. "Thank you," he said simply. There was no ego, no demand for recognition, only quiet acknowledgement of appreciation. He had shared his gift again, and the cafe had been transformed. The manager approached quietly, a mixture of awe and curiosity in his eyes. "You could play here every night," he said softly. "People would come from all over. I would love it." The man shook his head gently. "I play when it feels right," he said. "I don't perform for recognition. I just share what I love when the moment calls for it." The barista nodded, understanding completely. It was clear that his gift was not about fame, applause, or admiration. It was about music itself, about connection, and about the ability to touch hearts without words. The cafe had been transformed, not by extravagance or showmanship, but by the quiet brilliance of someone who simply loved what they did and shared it openly. The customers lingered for a while, reluctant to break the spell. They whispered to one another, recounting their favorite moments, their favorite notes, and the emotions stirred in them. Some shared their reflections with strangers, marveling at the humility and brilliance of the man. Others simply sat quietly, savoring the memory, feeling warmth and inspiration that would stay with them long after they had left. The man left the cafe quietly, as he always did. The rain had stopped outside, leaving the streets glistening under the morning sun. He walked away calmly, leaving behind a ripple of emotion that would carry through the hearts of everyone who had been present. The piano sat quietly in its corner, still and serene, yet charged with the memory of brilliance, waiting patiently for the next moment when music might bring wonder again. The barista returned to the counter, smiling softly. She realized that ordinary moments could hold extraordinary magic. Ordinary people could hold unimaginable talent. And sometimes all it took was the courage to share a gift, even for a cup of coffee, to transform lives and leave lasting memories. The cafe would never be the same. Its walls had absorbed the music, the hearts had absorbed the emotion, and everyone who had been there carried a pie.